Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, to the Meta Roundup, again, for patch 3.5. I assume that there's a lot of people that probably have some questions about the meta right now because of the current state of Abyss. Unlike last time, I'm not going to spend too much time explaining what each individual archetype is. I'll give a quick reminder for the ones that are less clear or that are a little bit ambiguous. If you want to know more about the teams that I don't elaborate too much on, you can go watch the previous Meta Roundup for patch 3.4. And yeah, so let's just get right into it. Let's start by just looking at the Abyss itself. So, Abyss Herald Frostfall, Abyss Herald Wicked Torrents, and then a bunch of Eremites, right? They spawned in 2 waves on each chamber. First wave being 3 Eremites, and the second wave being the Herald. On the first chamber, it's only 1. On the second chamber, it's 2. This chamber is honestly, it's unfortunate, because the Hydra and Cryo Heralds kind of prevent you from playing certain archetypes in each half. And as we'll see later on, some of the archetypes that it prevents from playing in their respective halves would have been significantly better in that half if they could make it past Chamber 1. Chamber 2, Magukenki on the first side. Second side is 2 waves. First wave has 3. It has the Defender, the Standard Bearer, and the Linebreaker. And then second wave has a second Standard Bearer, as well as the Rockbreaker Axe and Windcutter. When you're doing this, basically always go to the leftmost enemy from like your initial camera when you spawn. If you run towards, I think it's the Defender, the one with the bow, the Cryo one. The Pyro one will do a like swing attack where he does like a swing, and it's gonna basically make him like step into you, and then the other one is gonna dash to you, so you can group them that way. And then when you get to the second the second half, you kind of have 2 options. You can go like really right so that you're too far for the Standard Bearer to do its range attack, so it has to walk forward. But I personally don't like that. I prefer just walking towards the Standard Bearer. The Rockbreaker Axe will instantly walk towards you. The Windcutter will do 1 range attack and then walk towards you. Finally, last chamber, we've got 1 Ruin Guard, followed by 2 Frostform Lava Trolls. Lava Trolls spawn really far away from each other. And then we've got the worst part of this Abyss, which is the Weena. Even without the Weena, this Abyss is like arguably one of the hardest we've had, because the DPS requirements on top of the elemental requirements from chambers 1 and 2, they're not like that difficult, but they're definitely more difficult than average. But here's the thing about the Weena, okay? It spends over half the fight underground where you can't hit him. A lot of his attacks make him emerge far away from you instead of where you are, or at a random spot. His DPS windows are really short to the point where you won't actually be able to get a full rotation in most teams. But by far, the biggest thing is that they actually buffed the Weena for Abyss. The usual Weena has 25 resistance to everything except Animo, which is 60. The one in Abyss just has 30% more across the board, which means 55% baseline against every element and 90% against Animo. Now, when he does his attack, which is the 4th attack that he'll do generally, he spawns things in the air like that, and if you hit them with elements that can swirl, it's gonna reduce his resistance by 45% to that element. And if you break 2, it'll knock him down. It doesn't stack with itself, so you can't like reduce 1 element by 90, but from what I understand, you should be able to reduce 2 different elements. Here's the thing with this, like this paralysis is 10 seconds, but I think that the timer starts ticking when he falls, not once he's on the ground. Yeah, so it's closer to like 8 seconds, after which the resistance goes back up and he leaves. This is his longest like DPS window, and it's like 8 seconds. That's not ideal. On top of that, he's got like 2 million HP, right? So he's got basically the same amount of HP as usual bosses do in Spiral Abyss 12.3. But on top of that, he's got really high resistances, and he stalls for like over half the chamber. It's a pain in the ass. Like the Weena actually makes this Abyss really not fun to play. Anyways, all of those things are going to contribute to certain teams and certain archetypes being a lot better or a lot worse than usual this Abyss because of this little fucker. But yeah, so let's just get right into the archetypes. The first one I want to talk about, I think, is Nilou Bloom. Thankfully, they pushed out a patch on the first day of Abyss, right? Fixed an issue whereby the Abyss Herald Frostfall's Cryo Shield elemental application status would display abnormally, and it would be impossible to trigger a shatter reaction. This is not actually everything that was changed. Some other things that were changed as a part of this change is that they made it so that the Cryo Abyss Herald can take blunt damage to its shield. Every attack has like a certain amount of poise damage, and like when you accumulate enough poise damage, you stagger enemies. But poise damage also helps break shields a tiny little bit, which means that the poise damage makes it possible to break the Abyss Herald's shield even if you don't react with it. And so Nilou Bloom teams can get past this. However, and it's pretty important, it's pretty unlikely that you'll 3-star this chamber if you put a usual Nilou team here, unless you've got like a really, really high investment. Nilou, like the investment threshold to 3-star is significantly higher than for other good teams. But one thing that you can pretty easily do is do it and then run it again, just chamber 1 to get your 3 stars on chamber 1 and put Nilou on second side. Other than that though, Kenki is not great for her. It's a single target chamber, but obviously Kenki's not the tankiest or like hardest of Abyss enemies, so you can still get past it. She's actually really good in this chamber. She's pretty good here, but this is pain. Is it possible to clear the Wii with Nilou teams? Yes, it is. Is it possible to 3-star? Yes, it is. Would I expect most Nilou players to be able to do it? Fuck no. You need to have the good Nilou teams, and you have to play really well. I'm gonna leave a link in the description to a speedrun clear from a Nilou team. Right, so this one, it starts at 9:33, and the Wii dies at 8:25. So it's like 1 minute 8 seconds, which is pretty reasonable. But this is with key, which actually makes a pretty big difference. But again, right, like if you actually watch the speedrun, like this is how you should play if you really want to play Nilou in this Abyss. It is really, really well played. I wouldn't be able to play anywhere near as well as this. So just keep that in mind. It is possible, but it will be difficult. Overall, I'd say that this is a pretty bad Abyss for Nilou. She's got a few individual chambers where she's really good, right? So this chamber, she's really good. This chamber, she's really good. This chamber, she's pretty good. But this chamber, she's honestly pretty bad. This chamber, she's okay. Like it's fine. It's not that bad. Like she's not great, but Kenki's not the hard part of chamber 2, right? The first half of chamber 2 is the easier half. So it's not the end of the world. And then Wii is just, it's painful. So that's Nilou Bloom out of the way. I guess we can move on to like the non-Nilou Bloom and the Fridge teams. They basically have the same issues. You don't really have Electro or Pyro unit in your like straight up Bloom teams because otherwise they'd be Hyperbloom or Burgeon teams. So you'd still have the same issue with this. Generally, they have the same weakness as the Nilou teams, but are just worse. So Wii is basically going to be impossible. Like they're going to be pretty good against this, they're going to be pretty good against this, but all in all, just not really something I'd recommend. So what do I recommend? Well, let's take a look at just like the baseline straightforward stuff, right? On side 1, you've got a cryo shield. What's the best way of dealing with a cryo shield? Well, Pyro. On top of that, you've got a Froststorm Lava Turtle, which has a self cryo infusion, which lets you get a bunch of melts for free. So in the first chamber, one of the things that's really good is basically any teams that revolve around Pyro damage dealers. So mono Pyro teams, national teams, on-field Pyro carry teams are all actually pretty solid on the first side of this Abyss. Yoimiya is a little bit worse on the first half of the on the first chamber because, well, there's 3 enemies, but she'll be fine for the rest. Personally, I'd say that my favorite 2 Pyro carry teams for this have been any like mono Pyro teams with Bennett, Kazuha handling plus on-fielder, or I've been really liking Sucrose National. It does the last chamber so quickly. And they're also fine on second half. Obviously, getting past the Hydro Herald is a little bit more difficult. I've done a bunch of clears with it, but it's definitely not like the main thing I'd recommend, even if it does function. It's pretty good against this. Here's the thing about the Pyro teams against the Wii, they can be pretty good, but like they're really, really reliant on making sure that your Pyro is what breaks the like weak points of the Wii. And there are a few Pyro carries that can actually kind of struggle to do that. I'd say mainly Hu Tao. I say a few. It's like Hu Tao, Diluc. They have a bit of difficulty hitting the things themselves, so if you're not playing them with another Pyro, it can actually be pretty difficult to get the Pyro resistance to be the one that goes down, which hurts your damage a lot. You can still get past it because they're just really good single target teams, so even if you don't have the Pyro Res Shred, you can still be fine. But it's like, it's one thing to keep in mind, one thing that can fuck with you a little. Yeah, one of the ways that you can work around that is if the enemy has a Pyro Aura, which like can be hard to, it's a situation that you have to intentionally make happen because it's pretty hard to have the enemy have a Pyro Aura if you're playing like double Hydro Hu Tao, for example. But if they have a Pyro Aura, you can swirl the Wii, and the swirl is pretty likely to hit the weak points and knock it down, and as such, because it's a Pyro swirl that hits, you will be reducing Pyro resistance. But yeah, so one of the main ways that, for example, with Hu Tao, you can get a second Pyro unit, which makes things like this a lot easier to do, is to play VV Vape Hutao. The thing about that though is that because the Winut's DPS window is so short, it's a lot harder to play VV Vape because you have to make sure that all of your setup is like done by the time the enemy falls, right? Because otherwise, if your setup isn't done by the time you've hit the weak points, you start doing your setups, it takes you like 5 seconds, and then instead of having an 8-second-ish DPS window, you have like 3-second-ish DPS window, which just sucks. Also, he moves a lot, which means that often you want to use your stamina to catch up to him, which can with Hutao a little bit because she wants stamina to be able to do her optimal combos. But yeah, all in all, generally, I'd say that those Pyro carries are better used in the first half if you have a good single target team that can take care of the second half. I guess one other thing that I should talk about is, well, we have a new unit now, so how does she do in this abyss? Well, she's bad, right? Dehya's bad. But Mono Pyro as an archetype is really good this abyss, right? Because of the first side and how nice it is for Mono Pyro, which means that if you really want to play her, she's actually fine. Like, you can make it work in this abyss. I guess next up, I mean, I can talk about all the units that have banners this patch. So Cyno, not ideal for the first side. Like, he's fine, but these are not generally the kind of enemies that you'd want to use Cyno against. But Cyno's actually pretty good on the second side. The Renut is a single target, so any team that has good single target is gonna be very nice against him. Cyno can be played in like Quickbloom and Hyperbloom teams where you have good single target. Now, the main thing about this is if you don't have Nahida, it's shit. Because the Renut moves a decent amount, your Dendro units, the ones that like don't need to be swapped into all the time, right? The ones that you can just press E once and then swap out for 25 seconds, right? Like, that's Nahida. The other ones either need to swap back into the field more often to refresh their abilities, or have a pretty limited range on how big their AoE is. And because the Renut moves basically at each end of the abyss, it's very, very possible that he's just gonna move outside of your Dendro application. So if you don't have Nahida, I probably would not recommend Cyno this abyss. I mean, you can make him work in Chamber 1, of course, or sorry, in the first half. But the first half, outside of like if you have Nilou teams, as long as you have one element that can deal with the cryo shield in your team, the first half is basically a joke. Like, it's really, so if a team is good only on first half, they're like not that insane unless they're like one of the best teams on first half. I wouldn't say that Cyno's one of the best teams on first half. So all in all, it's like he works, he's fine. I did a clear when the abyss came out using Dehya, Mono Pyro on first side, and Cyno Hyperbloom on the second side, and like it was fine. I cleared in time. It wasn't like that close. Part of that is because I'm like pretty well invested though, but I don't think I would have been able to do it if I didn't have Nahida. It would have been a lot more difficult. I guess that's the thing that like it's a common link between a lot of the Dendro teams this abyss, because the Renut moves so much. There's a lot of teams that like it's a lot harder to clear if you don't have Nahida. But yeah, the reason why with Cyno it matters a bit more than some of the other Hyperbloom teams is because you don't want to have to swap out of him after you've used his burst, but like it can still function. Anyways, overall, Cyno's fine this abyss. It's not a great abyss for him, but it's not like unplayable for him either. The Renut is a challenge for basically every archetype, so it being a challenge for Cyno is not like special to him. It doesn't mean that he's bad this abyss. One thing though, you can play those teams with Cyno, you can play them with other Electro units, but Aggravate teams this abyss, they should be good, right? Dendro and Electro against this, that's great. The ability to aggravate your swirls against this, that's great. Fischl against this, that's great. Here's the thing though, the Renut's hitbox is bugged, and Fischl's Ascension 4 just doesn't hit him. Like, the lightning strike happens besides his hitbox. It doesn't hit him. He doesn't take damage from Fischl's A4. And Fischl's A4 is like half of her damage in the Quicken teams. And usually the Quicken teams rely pretty heavily on Fischl's damage for a single target. Basically, a bug makes Aggravate teams not unplayable, but like it makes them require significantly more investment to clear. Part of me wonders if they did it intentionally just because they wanted to nerf Fischl, but like it's very clearly not the kind of interaction that you would put in a game unless you're trying to manipulate your players. Like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm really unhappy about this. But yeah, I'll always keep GC Sim stuff. I'll always take it with a grain of salt. One of the things that can be really useful for is looking at damage distribution on your team. And you look at Fischl's Ascension 4 is 20% of your total team's DPS. So basically, assuming that you have this team, which like is a variation where your supports actually still do a reasonable amount of damage, you're losing 20% of your team's DPS because of the bug. It's not actually quite 20% because sometimes the A4 hits depending on which attack he's doing, but most of the time it doesn't. And because of the way that the Weena works, and because he doesn't do like the best attack for you all that often, losing 20% DPS might make your clear much more than 20% slower. Point being, this hurts a lot. It feels so scummy if it's intentional, and so stupidly inattentive if it's not. It's like that's half her damage basically that just goes away. Anyways, point being, while Aggravate teams can still be good this Abyss, they're definitely worse than they should be because of this bug. That kind of means that you have a bit more of an incentive to play the Quicken teams that are less reliant on Fischl. So you can play spread teams, right? The Hytham teams. You can play Quicken Yai teams, and it won't be better than usual, but the alternative will be worse than usual. Yeah, units like Dehya, that kind of stuff. But yeah, outside of that, they're fine on side 1. Fischl plus any on-field Electro unit makes this Herald's shield just instantly disappear because Fischl's A4 hits so much, so it breaks down the shield so much. And it doesn't even have to be a traditional on-field Electro, right? If you have Beto on your team as an off-fielder, right, like in a Taser team or whatever, or like Sucro's Aggravate team, you can swap into Beto once he gets to his shield phase, and because of, if you have her C4, right, the Electro Infusion that she gets, plus her burst, it makes the shield disappear pretty quickly. Like, it's not faster than Pyro, but for the quote-unquote wrong element, it's really good. And also, good thing, right? If you go TF on her with Fischl, makes the shield disappear honestly as fast as Pyro does because you're just applying so much Electro. If you're looking for like just this chamber is what you're struggling with, you can also use stuff like Sunfire Gene to break down the shield really basically instantly. For this guy, if you're struggling to break like strictly on this chamber, you can play basically any team that revolves around Cryo or Dendro. Honestly, you can play Fridge. It is actually like really good at doing this chamber specifically because both Cryo and Dendro hurt the shield really, like they do a lot of damage to it. But yeah, getting back to like the Aggravate and Quicken teams, all in all, they're decent first side, decent second side, but this is definitely not like the best Abyss for them. But you'll be able to make it work. For the spread teams themselves, though, like looking at Hytham and Dehya as like carries in like double Dendro Quicken teams, they actually do really well because usually in those teams you wouldn't play Fischl anyways, because or if you were to play Fischl, you wouldn't get a lot of Ascension 4 procs anyways. So the Ascension 4 being bugged against the Weena doesn't really matter. So those teams don't actually lose anything on the second side. On top of that, Dendro's really good against this shield, and if you have Nahida, right, the AoE is really good against these. All in all, this is actually a really good Abyss for Hytham specifically. It's also decent for Dehya, but you are gonna struggle a little bit more on chambers 1 and 2 than with Hytham. But yeah, you won't be able to take advantage of the minus 45% res shred or resistance that the Weena has when you hit its weak points, because you have to swirl, right, and Dendro can't swirl. Or actually, I don't know if it's a swirl stuff, but it has to be an element that can be swirled. And so like you still have that like is a bit of a downside, but the other factors basically make it so that Hytham is still like a pretty solid option this Abyss. But not just in the spread teams, also in the Quickbloom and Hyperbloom teams, right? Quickbloom and Hyperbloom in this Abyss, just like many others, not quite as good as usual because you can't reduce the Dendro resistance with the Weenups mechanic. However, a lot of the Hyperbloom teams can actually pretty easily get a reasonable amount of damage outside of the like weakness window. So during his other attacks, a lot of them can actually get a reasonable amount of damage, which means that it would be not that big of a portion of your damage that would be increased anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. Specifically, I guess Yelan this Abyss feels really nice because the Weenut's third attack, the one where he comes out of the ground and starts like shooting at you, it was like, ooh. He'll always emerge from the ground as far away as possible from where you currently are when he starts his animation. Which means that ideally, right, after the second attack, you try to stand close to the middle so that you have less distance to run. But any characters that have a way to run faster, like Yelan, I guess like Sayu as well, but also it's a bit more of a sacrifice to run Sayu on your team. They feel really good because they basically give you like 1.5, maybe even 2 more seconds of damage against the enemy during that third attack, which can actually be pretty relevant. But yeah, that's also, I guess, an upside for Dehya and basically any other range carries. But yeah, so that can be pretty useful, right? So I guess one of the things that we could be looking at next is the most known range carry for being ranged, Ganyu, I guess. Ganyu in the first side is it's okay. These guys with Ganyu, not ideal. This guy is fine. This is okay if you're playing Melt Ganyu. Ganyu's second side, Freeze Ganyu is really good in the first 2 chambers. Freeze Ganyu is garbage against the Weenut. Melt Ganyu is fine against the first chamber, and against the second chamber, and against the third chamber. It's just pretty fine overall. This is probably one of the better abysses for Melt Ganyu. Burn Melt specifically also has some upside this abyss because the other Melt variations, your Pyro application has a range limit. So you still have to run to the Weenut when he does his third attack. If you play Nahida Burn Melt, which is harder to play, right, you have to get your timings right, but if you do get your timings right, you don't need to walk close to him to reapply Pyro, right? The Pyro will stay on him as long as you get your timings right, and Nahida's E is on him, which like it's 25 seconds, so it better fucking be. So you don't actually have to walk all the way up to be in sailing range or something like that. But yeah, so those are like nice little things that make Ganyu, I'd say, better than usual this abyss. Melt Ganyu specifically. Freeze Ganyu, I don't know. Let's talk about Freeze in general. Freeze is just... I mean, Freeze against this is just not it. Against this is just not it. Against these is just not ideal. Against this is insane. Against this, insane. Against this, unplayable. It's a lot like Nilou, right? It's not unplayable. You can make it work with enough investment if you play well enough, but it's not the kind of content you want to be doing with that team. Like, it will make you unhappy. This is actually one of the abysses where there's actually quite a bit of value in going for Mono Cryo over Freeze. Because these enemies, they get, I mean, this one, not really that one, these ones, but like for some of their attacks, they get basically effects that make them immune to stagger for a reasonable amount of time, which means that you don't need to freeze them for your Ayaka burst to deal a decent amount of damage to them, right? Because usually without freeze, Ayaka's burst just like does one tick, it staggers the enemy away, and then it keeps moving forward, and then hits, and you only get like a third of your damage. But if the enemies have stagger resistance, you get a lot more. And then the Abyss Heralds, obviously, Ayaka's very good against that, just like Cryo in general. These guys, the first wave is going to be a little bit of a pain, but they're not that tanky, so it's not that bad. And then the second wave, the Rockbreaker Axe and the Wind Cutter have really, really high stagger resistance, so your Ayaka burst can hit a reasonable amount. This one's gonna be a little bit more of a pain, but yeah, like, it's not ideal, but it's playable. And then on the last half, Mono Cryo is just so much, or the last chamber, Mono Cryo is just, it does a lot better than Freeze does, because, well, you can't freeze the Weenut. Yeah, Ayaka against the Weenut can be fine, you just have to make sure that you use your burst at the right moment. There are some attacks that let you do the stuff more reliably. One thing though, for Cryo and Freeze teams to keep in mind, when you apply Cryo onto an enemy, it slows them down. And because it slows them down, it will change the timings of their attacks. Now, the way that the Weenut's AI works is it will decide to do its like special attack that you can cancel after a specific amount of time. Now, usually that specific amount of time is always after 4 attacks because, well, it's 4 attacks. But when he's applied with Cryo, his attacks are slower. And when his attacks are slower, he's gonna have done less attacks by the time his like special attack window happens. That usually lines up to being a little bit to him doing the thing after 3 attacks. And even though the attacks are slower because he's applied with Cryo, it does end up, from what I understand, I haven't done too much testing on this, it does end up doing the vulnerable phase a little bit earlier. But one thing though is because he does it after 3 attacks, you have to be careful. You have to make sure that you're ready to use your Ayaka burst or whatever on the 4th attack. That's kind of it with the Cryo stuff. Freeze is really good for chambers 1 and 2 second half, but really, really bad for chamber 3. You can make it work if you're like actually really, really invested. Otherwise, Mono Cryo is not quite as good in chambers 1 and 2, but better in chamber 3. As we've already talked about Mono Pyro and Mono Cryo, we can talk about the other monos. So Mono Hydro against this doesn't really work, and Mono Hydro against this also doesn't really work. Can you technically like get past it somehow with poise damage? Sure. And Mono Hydro's pretty good against this, not that great against this, decent against this, and pretty good against this. But the thing is, there's not much of a reason to play Mono Hydro, because on like just as a general rule, Mono Hydro has the weakness of like being very, very single target focused for most of its variations, and also that the Hydro reactions are so good that most of the time you get better results from replacing one of your Hydro units with one of a different element. In this Abyss, that's still the case, and it's even more so because a different element also lets you get past the shields properly. So I'd say Mono Hydro this Abyss, probably not the play. Not what I would recommend. Mono Geo. it's kind of fine on both sides, right? Like usually when you do Mono Geo, one of your slots can be used as any element, right? One of your slots is pretty flexible, so you can deal with the shields pretty easily, but you don't even need to because the Geo can deal with the shields by itself. It's just a bit of a pain. Shields against these feel really bad because they get their like special attacks from hitting shields. And then, yeah, Albedo's Flower gets destroyed really often against the Weena. If you want to play Mono Geo this Abyss, I would probably recommend doing on the first side over the second side. I guess now we can talk about the hyper carry teams. Some of them are fine this Abyss. Xiao is pretty good on the first side. It's not his best Abyss. Wanderer, also decent on the first side, but not his best Abyss. But both of them are basically unplayable against the Weena. Again, right, Weena has even higher resistance against Animo. It's 90%, and you can't swirl Animo, so you can't reduce it from there. So with Burgeon, you can get it to 60%, and that's with your red shred. And with Zhongli, it's 40%, sure. But like you're doing half the damage you usually are if you're using both of them. If you're using only Burgeon, it's closer to like a third of your damage you're usually doing. Right? Because usually, right, if enemies start at 10% HP or 10% Animo resistance, res, pre-shred, res, post, shred. If you start at like 10%, so you're doing 11% of the damage that you usually do without any shred. If you have Farazan, you're doing 36% of the damage that you usually do. And if you have Farazan plus Zhongli, you're doing 50% of the damage that you usually do. All in all, Animo carries this Abyss on the second side are not the play. You can use them on the first side though. Other than that, for the other hypers, Eula's actually pretty decent this Abyss. First side is meh. It's okay, but Frostfall, like this is not ideal. This is whatever. These are, I mean, this one's not ideal, but it's fine. This is whatever, fine. The second side, this is fine. Like it's okay. This is actually pretty decent, but also not great. You have to make sure that you group them properly. Otherwise, it's like really bad. But yeah, and then with Eula, it's kind of weird. Eula is one of the units that has really easy access to Res Shred in her kit, right? She has Res Shred in her kit itself. You get Superconduct. If you're using Rosario, you're getting more. If you're using Shenhe, you're getting more. Which means that she's not losing that much damage from the Weena's higher resistances. However, she still has the issue of it stalls a lot, it goes away a lot. So you need to make sure that A, you know like when you need to swap out early to make it explode before he just disappears. And B, honestly, you're gonna need to watch someone else's clear and copy what they're doing, or like practice it a lot yourself, because you need to do it at the right timings. Otherwise, you're gonna lose, like you're gonna get half of the stacks that you could be getting. If you do that though, we know it's doable. It's still not ideal. There's still much better choices, but it can work. But yeah, other hyper carries, Raiden this Abyss is pretty good. If you play her first side, I usually play her with Bennett, so this isn't much of a problem. This isn't much of a problem. This isn't much of a problem. If you play her second side, the Abyss Heralds might be a little rough. One of the ways to go about that is to just like play Fischl as your last slot. And because Hyper Raiden teams don't actually have electro reactions happen from Raiden very much, that means that you don't really get Fischl A4s anyways. So, or at least you don't get a lot. It can f with your setups though, so you just have to be careful about that. Just make sure that you're getting the right swirls properly. It's pretty fine against this, and it is actually pretty good against the Weena. Raiden is one of the units that has like relatively short uptime with a setup that isn't that long to do. Just don't greed your Kazuha burst. You don't always need to use it. If the Weena has been knocked down, it's possible that using your Kazuha burst will, like at the wrong moment, will slow you down too much. Just make sure that you use you don't greed too much with using your abilities. Make sure that you get as many bursts from Raiden as possible, and you should be fine. Also, don't hesitate to just use Kazuha's burst before he's gonna spawn from somewhere, just to like have it out of the way, because again, right, it's a pretty long animation. If you wait until you're on the mob to use it, well, he's gonna be gone by the time you get to Raiden. Oh right, another Pyro archetype that I hadn't mentioned earlier, reverse melt quick swap teams. They're fine this Abyss. It's kind of it. They're just fine. I'd rather play Mono Pyro with Animo units, but not everyone has Kazuha. Not everyone has like the good Pyro drivers or Animo drivers for Mono Pyro. So if that's what your situation is, Rev Melt is fine. AirFryer, honestly, just don't. AirFryer cannot clear the Weena. It just doesn't have the single target DPS, and it's gonna struggle with a Kenki because it just does not have the single target DPS. Again, AirFryer as a reminder is using Animo units to trigger burning and to keep burning going on the enemies. Taser this Abyss it's not a particularly good, nor is it a particularly bad Abyss for Taser. Beto, specifically this Abyss, sometimes can feel pretty bad on the second side because again, right, like your Artist Chamber is the Weena. Fischl bug against the Weena. So I'd probably play it first side, but really it doesn't matter that much. But yeah, and now we're left with Burgeon before we get into all the culinary teams. Burgeon is actually pretty good on the first side this Abyss. Actually really good on the first side of this Abyss. It does really well. I'd say that Burgeon is a really good way to get a fast Chamber 3 first half without having to use any of the good units that you have if you don't have that many good units. If your account is still relatively new or there are certain units that you don't want to play, a lot of the Burgeon teams that you can just do pretty well against this even by using like pretty underwhelming units, right? Like you can do Toma, Barbara, Cole, Ganega or some shit, I don't know. That being said though, if you do decide to go for something like that, I'd probably go for one of the archetypes that I'll get into in a little bit that are like subtypes of Burgeon. I guess we can start with the subtypes of Burgeon. So there's let's start with Oven. Oven is not great this Abyss. You don't really want to play Burgeon second side because it's mainly a team that focuses on AoE. Just like Nilou, you can make it work, but it's not what you really want to be doing. So you'd rather play it on first side, and first side is not friendly to cryo units. And as a reminder, Oven is playing a Burgeon team where you have a cryo unit to help with your gauge stuff, and it gets you more seeds and it gets you some freeze, which is nice. But yeah, in this Abyss, not the best one for that. Next up, we've got Sauté, which is Burgeon with an Animo unit. Ideally, the Animo unit being the one that triggers the Burgeon. It's actually fine this Abyss. It's pretty good against this, right? Keeps them grouped pretty well. You can Pyro infuse a Kazuha burst to get the Herald Shield done pretty quickly. It's pretty bad against the Kenki. Like Chamber 2 is generally not the problem, and in Chamber 2, second half is generally harder than first half. It's not the end of the world. And then it's decent against this. Although I would not recommend playing Sauté because I think that the last Burgeon subtype, Curry, is better in this Abyss. So as a reminder, Curry is you put an Electro unit in your Burgeon team. Ideally an Electro unit that will not steal your Burgeons too much. So someone like Fischl, someone like Beto. Curry on the first side of this Abyss is really good. Curry on the second side of this Abyss actually functions. It's the only Burgeon team that I would actually feel comfortable recommending against the Weenut. It's not ideal. You'd still rather play non-Burgeon teams, but if you're going to be playing a Burgeon team against the Weenut, you want it to be a Curry team. If you remember from the last meta roundup, I showcased my favorite Curry team, the Thundering Fury, like Razor, Bennett, Nahida, Singto. It does really well in the first chamber, and it still does fine on the second chamber in this Abyss, although enemy that moves a lot and that has like short DPS uptimes is not ideal for a unit like Razor, especially when paired with a unit like Bennett. You're playing Circle Impact and long uptime, but I've done a bunch of clears with it. Like it can still work, but it's definitely not like your main choice. And now that leaves us with the last few things. We've got Soup. Soup, as a reminder, is Animo, Pyro, Hydro, Electro. You're basically getting overloads, vapes, electro charges, swirls. Because it has so many different elements, first half is not really a problem for any of them. Second half is generally not a problem. You usually have more than enough single target and more than enough AoE in good Soup teams. First half of Chamber 3, not really a problem. It's fine. It kind of depends on which specific instance you're playing. My personal favorite, which is the Su Singto Mon, Sucrose, Singto, Fischl, Sailing, is not Circle Impact, right? You're not relying on Kogami Jellyfish, you're not relying on Bennett Burst. All of your units can move very freely, and as such, the Weenut is not like particularly difficult. Also because you're on fielding Sucrose, it's really easy to get him down, like break his weak points. It's really easy to hit them with more than one element. Make sure that you're reducing resistances to multiple of your elements. All in all, Soup is pretty solid this Abyss. Really good first side and pretty good second side as well. Next up, we've got HyperFridge. HyperFridge is not great this Abyss. All right, adding a Cryo unit to your Hyperbloom team is really good when you're not fighting Cryo enemies and when you're not fighting bosses. This Abyss, not the greatest one for it. Last Abyss was pretty good for HyperFridge, which is why I showcased it, but this Abyss is definitely not the best for it. And then finally, the last archetype that I have is Salad, which is Hyperbloom with an Animo unit as your trigger. Salad is actually pretty solid this Abyss as well. Salad's never bad, it's always pretty decent. Although on the Weenut, because DMC burst doesn't cover enough area to always be hitting the Weenut, and because the team generally performs worse, or is a lot harder to play with Nahida than with DMC, then it hasn't felt all that insanely good against the Weenut, but it's still like pretty solid. It's just nothing insane. Anyways, that actually does it for the archetypes I wanted to talk about. There are a few other things that I would want to add. Someone in my chat commented asking about Electro MC in the Thundering Fury team recently, right? Doing this instead of Razor, and I was intrigued. I hadn't thought about it because back when I came up with Thundering Fury, the only Dendro option that we had really was the MC, right? Like Cole just didn't really work for stuff like that, and so it was basically just the MC. But now that we have Nahida, then MC doesn't have to be Dendro, and so I kind of didn't really think about the implications of that too much, but it does make sense. Like, yeah, that means that you can use non-Dendro MC in your Dendro teams. I've tested this a decent amount, and I would say that it's worse than the Razor variant, but not everyone has a level 90 Razor, so if you have a C6 Bennett, you have Nahida, you have Xingqiu, and you don't want to level Razor just to test the team, then you can test it with your main character if he's already leveled, or if she's already leveled. You just run AMC full EM, catch its own E. Like, it does work, it's decent. But yeah, it's a nice, cool little thing that you can try. But yeah, that basically does it for the archetypes. Honestly, I hate this Abyss. Another thing that I didn't mention, the blessing is when you take damage, you deal more damage, but who cares, man? It doesn't change anything. So I guess I can show a few teams because as I do think I want to make this a thing for every Abyss that I show 2 teams. So don't judge me on the second side too much. I don't play Kuki very often, and I don't play non-Xingqiu Hyperbloom teams very often either. So I'm probably gonna f up my rotations pretty badly. Let's do this. I'm a little bit dumb, but it's fine. I want to make sure I get my burst back. I don't want to kill him too quickly. If I wanted to kill him quickly, I'd drop Bulba here and start Bulba swirling him. But I want to make sure I get my energy back, so I'll wait a little. Why did I do that? Oh. That's fine. Wait, I didn't get my actual burst back. Why do I do it like that? I'm done. It's fine. I slowed myself down a lot by doing that. Whatever. I want to get my burst back. I didn't get my burst back. Fuck. Yeah, so here, I like going right here. Alright, and then if you have a little bit of stagger. Oopsie daisy. Kind of fucked it up. Yeah, I fucked up my grouping here. I don't want to start over though. whatever. It happens. Like I said, please don't judge it too much. And then last chamber, I don't have my burst because I'm a dumbass. That was not my best one with this team. 40 seconds. I've done better, but that's fine. But yeah, one thing that's nice here is his first attack doesn't happen instantly. So if you have Nilou on your team, you can always like start the chamber by using her burst. Like, what the fuck else are you gonna do? Right? Now here, go towards the middle a little bit, and then as soon as he spawns, you walk towards him even more. Now he's gonna do one more attack. And after this, he's doing the big attack that you can cancel. I'm setting up everything. Once everything is set up. Ah, fuck me. I got spawned on the wrong side. I think I'm fine though. Yeah, I'm close enough. Mostly. Can't quite reach that seed. Oh, I got it there. Nice. Why did I not press E? We may never know. We may never know. Now, when you play well, when your team is well suited to single target, this is not the best version of single target Hyperbloom, obviously. Hayato is not the unit you want to be playing in single target situations generally. And I honestly played it a little bit poorly. I set up my stuff the wrong moments. Yeah, all in all, like, a really good Weenut clear, you can kill it like the first time he goes down. Raiden, like Raiden for Hyperbloom, can be used here, but there are definitely like moments where sometimes her E just doesn't reach the seeds because, again, hitbox problems. So just keep that in mind. I say that Cookie is probably easier to make work than Raiden for the Hyperbloom teams this Abyss. But yeah, that basically does it for the meta roundup. If you enjoyed, if this is the kind of content that you like seeing, let me know. I kind of like doing this. Like I like doing the first one and it actually did pretty well, which like made me really happy because it just encourages me to do it again, you know? So if you like this kind of content, leave a like, let me know in the comments. I would actually very much appreciate that. And honestly, just also pray that we don't get the Weenut and Abyss ever again. Like, please, just leave. We've had leaks on the next Abyss. I'm not gonna spoil it actually, but I'd say that next Abyss is a lot easier than this Abyss. You're gonna need to have solid single target and solid AoE, but the enemies that we're gonna be fighting are a lot less cringe than the Weenut is. But yeah, I'm actually looking forward to the next Abyss. It actually looks pretty fun. I mean, it's gonna have its share of like cringe things, but I have to say that they're a lot easier to work around than the Weenut, so that's nice. But yeah, so that'll be it. Thank you for watching YouTube, and I'll see you guys in the next one.